Howdy, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another Reading with Rick. Those few of you out there supporting me, I appreciate you genuinely. Um, Tonight, we're going to be doing a classic, and that is Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. Hemingway, this book is set in a Civil War torn Spain around the late 30s, I believe. 1937 is when Hemingway himself was there. He was traveling as he was working for the North American Newspaper Alliance. And so this novel follows uh, a man, kind of a lone wolf, if you will, of the resistance in this movement in a time of political unrest, a lot of heinous war crimes going on, and just people being executed, towns torn apart. And we're not going to be reading about Robert Jordan, though. We are going to be reading a small section about a character in the book called El Sordo. And so this is kind of towards the end of the book when things are really starting to boil over. A lot of these guys are people who are kind of camped out in the woods, more guerrilla warfare fighter types. And El Sordo has, the people who are pursuing him have kind of he's wound up. Him and his men have kind of gotten stranded on a hill fighting. And in this moment we're about to read, he kind of realizes what their fate's about to be. If he had known how many men in history have had to use a hill to die on, it would not have cheered him any, for in the moment he was passing through, men are not impressed by what has happened to other men in similar circumstances, any more than a widow of one day is helped by the knowledge that other loved husbands have died. Whether one has fear of it or not, one's death is difficult to accept. Sordo had accepted it, but there was no sweetness in its acceptance even at 52, with 3 wounds and him surrounded on a hill. He joked about it to himself, but he looked at the sky and at the far mountains, and he swallowed the wine, and he did not want it. If one must die, he thought, and clearly one must, I can die, but I hate it. I love this. I love this little short. These 2 paragraphs. I mean, it's an amazing scene. The whole thing. I mean, obviously it's Hemingway. I mean, he's one of the great literary figures. He has a way of saying a lot in a very in layman's terms. I think he's very straightforward, and yet such beautiful craft. But what really stuck out to me about this, and this won't be a surprise to you if you've watched any of my other videos, is just the parallel to the gospel here. Calvary Hill. That last paragraph about he looked at the sky and at the far mountains, and he swallowed the wine, and he did not want it. If one must die, he thought, and clearly one must, I can die. I immediately was taken to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Christ's kind of last moment of, he has this moment of anguish where he's praying to the Father in heaven and asking, your will be done. But if I can pass this cup, if I don't have to drink from this, then save me. And again, it's inevitable. Just like we see here. If one must die, thought, and clearly one must, I can die. And so it's just such a beautiful scene. And we all, we're all faced with this challenge. We come into this life and, I don't know when it hits you. It's something, I don't know, throughout my life, even as a young kid, I've really thought about death a lot. I don't know why. It's just something that was always on my mind. But we come into this life knowing it's the only way out. Some of us are able to repress it more. I think we are at a time in society when this is probably the most disconnected we have been with our own mortality. I won't get into a lot of my beliefs on that, but I think if you look around, you can see it showing just how unaware people are of just that, they're not going to be around forever. It's honestly sad. But in a deeper sense, as a Christian, as someone who recognizes this life for what it is, what are you dying for? Like I said, not necessarily just in the physical, how are you going to die or how long are you going to live? All that's kind of to the wayside. what do Sordo here is dying for a cause that he believes in. Whether you agree with him or not, he is fallen on this hill. He's wounded, 52 years old. uh, as it mentions, not a back then, certain, I mean, more of a long life, I guess, back then, but today, you still have a lot of life left. So, I mean, at what stage in your life are you willing to say, I'm willing to put myself aside and spend my life fighting for this cause or this mission? Um, I think if you can't get to a point where you're willing to die for something, that I don't really know what you're living for. Um, I just assume yourself. I assume, it's almost like an animalistic existence, just self-preservation and just, getting what pleasures you can out of this life. There's so much more. There's so much more. And when you have that moment, when you look at the sky, you look at those far mountains, and you finally say, "Okay, I'm going to drink from this cup." Uh, you're facing the inevitable. And again, Hemingway he has such a way of, this is the only, and I'll be honest, this is the only Hemingway book I've ever read. We love to talk about Hemingway, especially writers and people who want to be writers. They love to romanticize him, but I think a lot fewer of us than would like to admit have actually read him. So this was the first actual Hemingway piece I've read. I only read it a couple years ago, and it just really, I had heard about Hemingway being so straightforward, but he just has such a way of having humans on the page doing human things with a much deeper rooted meaning in it. And I really admire that. I really admire that, because I try to do that in my own writing. I try to be more just to the point. I try to let the simpler actions say a lot more, just kind of hint at a lot more. And so I really enjoyed reading this. Recommend it to anybody out there. Of course, for your, it's one of those books or it's one of those authors, one of those books that if you're aspiring to be a writer, or if you're just interested in American classics, pick it up. Also, as always, check us out over at stoveleg.com. Igniting conversation. Thank you for joining me. It's always a pleasure. God bless y'all. Christ loves you. I love you. Thank you for being a part of this community and helping me build something that I'm passionate about. Peace.